And the Leicester Socialist Party has selected Steve Score to stand in May's mayoral elections here in Leicester. You'll remember that a former government minister, Baroness Verma, was named as the Conservative candidate. Green Party candidate is Mags Lewis, and they'll all face Sir Peter Soulsby, who's been the Labour City Mayor for the last 7 years or so. Well, Steve, you may remember, chaired the successful Save Glenfield's Children's Heart Centre campaign and continues to be involved in local campaigning around defending the NHS. He's got a long record here in Leicester of fighting government and local cuts in services. Also secretary of the local anti-poll tax federation, which locally led the struggle to end the local tax introduced by Margaret Thatcher back in the 1990s. I'm giving his age away there, aren't I? It resulted in it being scrapped, of course. Steve, welcome to the studio.
Welcome.
What about this campaign to become the next city mayor then? What sort of issues are you campaigning on?
Well, the most important issue is that local services have been devastated because of government cuts over a whole period of time. And the council itself in its own paperwork says that, leaving aside adults and children's social services, which it has a legal duty to provide, cuts to all the other services which the council provide, and there's a lot, between 2010 and 2020 will have been reduced by 60%, which is a huge figure. We've seen closure of all sorts of local facilities, youth clubs, community centres, all sorts of services, homeless hostels, and the cuts will go on and will accelerate over the next few years unless something is done. Now, our view is that people like Sir Peter Soulsby, rather than taking a stand and fighting the government for the money that's needed, have just passed on those cuts to the people of Leicester. And we think that there is an alternative to that they could have a no-cuts strategy, which would involve building a campaign like we did over Glenfield, involving the people of Leicester, the workers on the council, people who use council services, the population as a whole, and link up with other cities around the country to start forcing the government to provide the money that's needed. They could set a no-cuts budget by using the reserves they have in the bank and also their powers to borrow. Now, that's not a long-term solution on its own, but what it does is it builds you time in order to campaign to get that money.
Some people might say that's a futile battle, though.
Well, they said that saving Glenfield's Heart Centre was a futile battle. I remember reporters saying that exactly to me, and people power proved them wrong. We've got a government at the moment that is in the midst of all sorts of crises. And I think it's a good time for people to stand up and say we've had enough. But it needs leadership. It needs the mayor, who is all-powerful in reality, as far as the city council goes, to give a lead on that and to oppose those cuts. Yeah,
some people might say, given that you're backed by the Socialist Party locally, that you might not even think that a city mayor is a good idea, though.
Oh, no. I mean, I campaigned against the idea of having a city mayor because
why would you want to be one if you don't think they should have one?
Well, one of the things I will do is within my term of office of 4 years, I will propose a referendum of the people of Leicester decide whether they want one, because they never got a vote on whether we were going to have a mayor in the first place. I think it's far better to have a system where you have elected councillors who collectively make decisions, and you've got more access to your local councillor to lobby them over things than you do to a remote city mayor. So I would like to see it abolished by the end of that term of office.
Would a referendum work?
Well,
turnouts for elections aren't brilliant, but referendums not much better. And of course, the last referendum we had is still in dispute.
But this would be a local one within the city over simply do we have a mayor or not, and the people of Leicester could then decide. But in the meantime, probably the more pressing issue is how do we resist these cuts in services, and that's the most important issue to me. And I would use those 4 years to fight those cuts. To use the money we've got. Now, they will say, well, firstly, they say it's illegal. It's not illegal. As long as you balance your budget, it's fine. They will say there's not enough reserves. But actually, they tell you about the £15 million they have in reserves as a sort of emergency fund. But there's £127 million in there, usable reserves that are part of ones that have not been ring-fenced for other things. So there is a lot of money that they could use and borrowing powers to keep things running. And then they could go to people who work in the city, in the council, and also service users and say, stand with us to build a campaign to get that money. Let's do it like Glenfield, only 10 times bigger.
Of course, there are tight reins on council tax, and I guess a lot of people would not be happy for a further raise in council tax anyway. So you wouldn't be asking for that, would you?
No, because I think, I don't think we should penalise people either way by extraordinarily large council tax demands or by cutting their services. The money is there nationally. The government over years has cut the tax that the rich pay. You could get the money off them to pay for local services, but it needs a campaign to do it.
Are you confident of getting support on this? There's an awful lot of unease about middle ground politics at the moment anyway, isn't there?
I think that it is quite feasible for an outsider to win an election like this. I mean, Pete Salisbury has a massive majority. Leicester is very much a Labour city. That's fine. By the way, I support Jeremy Corbyn nationally in his anti-austerity policies. I think, if it was a general election, I wouldn't be standing. But as far as local elections are concerned, what's the point of having a Labour council when they're doing the Tory government's dirty work? Let's have a council that is different.
It could be a possibility that you could split the left of centre votes and enable Baroness Verma to become the next city mayor, perhaps.
I think that's incredibly unlikely, personally, given the scale of the majority that Labour has. Plus, by the way, on a ballot paper for the mayor, you have 2 votes. You can have a first and a second vote. So if you wanted to, you could vote for me number 1 and somebody else for number 2.
Who will your second vote go to?
It'll probably go for Labour.
You're an honest man. We'll speak to you again, I'm sure, before the elections in May. But Steve, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Steve Score, the Socialist Party representative, candidate for the mayoral election later this summer. And we'll speak